Hey everybody, my name's Peter Laws and this is the Flicks the Church Forgot. I have gone to HorrorCon in Sheffield for the last 3 years, and it's great. The first 2 years I went, I was able to make some YouTube videos of that, and you can see them on my channel. This year I wasn't able to make a video. That's not because I wasn't there. I was there, but I was quite involved in doing some things for the convention this time. I was hosting a Q&A with the actor John Jarratt, for example, the guy from Wolf Creek, who plays Mick Taylor. If you're interested in seeing the video for that, I've got that coming up in the next episode of this little very mini series on HorrorCon. I was hosting another panel for something called the Monster Charity Project. I'll talk about that in a moment, and a couple of other things, as well as signing copies of my book. Copies of my book, Purged. Oh yeah. That's one of the early covers, but it looks kind of like that, which is out in all good bookshops now. So I was too busy, basically, to be able to make a video this time round. But I still wanted to kind of chat to you guys and reflect a little bit on what I was up to there. I'd say HorrorCon is just getting bigger and better. It takes place up in Sheffield in the north of England, and it happens in this really amazing place called the Magna Centre, which is, I don't know what it is, like an old steelworks, I think. But it's just this huge, massive, enormous, in fact, like building, industrial building. And when you walk in, the entrance is fantastic because you're kind of thinking, what is this place? It's so dark and atmospheric, and there's like horror music pumping out. There's like Goblin, Tenebrae and things that are playing over the speakers, and you think, this is my type of place. So it's great. So you walk through this bit in the HorrorCon place, and there's loads of sort of stalls where you can throw axes at zombies and all that sort of stuff, and then you can make your way up to the big hall, and it's in the big hall where there's loads of merchandise that you can buy. I'll talk about that in a moment too, but also there's loads of great guests, famous people from Horrorland that you can chat to, and I had the good fortune of meeting quite a few of the guests while I was there. I drove up on the Friday night before it started, so I could stay over before I started. So it was really cool on Friday night to hang out with Heather Langenkamp from Nightmare on Elm Street. She, of course, played Nancy in that film, very iconic role, memorable to many of us perhaps, and she's lovely. I mean, we just there's a few of us sat together in the bar, and we're just chatting about movies, about Nightmare on Elm Street a bit, but also me and her were chatting a lot about children and accents, and a few of the guys were there talking about that too, and England and what England was like in America. She's just really cool lady. And also talking about her current work. I had no idea that her and her husband are connected with the American Horror Story show, doing the effects for that. I didn't know that, so that was quite a revelation. But anyway, she was lovely, and it was fun to chat with her. Anyway, that night as well, I was chatting with Graham Humphreys, who is the artist behind some just absolute key works of art when it comes to horror, particularly from my youth. The Evil Dead, Nightmare on Elm Street, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Return of the Living Dead, just loads of really key images that are kind of locked in the marrow of my brain. And so it was just great to sit and chat with him for a bit and share a drink with him and talk, and also be like, it's weird, right? Because he does not look old enough to have done those posters in that time, because I mean, I was I don't know, 10 or 8 or something when I started seeing these things. I was born in 1974, so 8, I guess, or 9 before I started seeing these posters in my life, and he was like in his early 20s doing them, and yet I'm sitting with him in this bar, and he looks younger than I do. It's weird. He must like drink virgin's blood or something. And as I was chatting to him, actually behind us was Cassandra Peterson from Elvira, who was another guest, and it sounds like she was a great guest, but I didn't get to meet her. She was doing her own thing, just sitting chatting, and she wasn't being unfriendly or nothing. She was just sitting doing her stuff, and I didn't go over and say, hey, how you doing? Just left her to herself. But she seemed lovely, and from all accounts that I've heard, people really enjoyed getting to meet her. But anyway, she was there, and she also looked really like young, considering what she's been doing, that how early she was coming out. When I was a little kid, she was on TV. In fact, she looked so young that one of the guys in our groups in our group was saying, oh, well, you do know, isn't it? Like, Elvira is like, it's like the Doctor Who, you know, like every decade or so, like they might bring a new one in. And I think this was related to some sort of talent show that she did, sort of search for the next Elvira. But no, sure enough, that was the Elvira. There is just one Elvira, really, and that was her. And yeah, she looks like great for her age, and really went down well with the crowd there. So that was great. But anyway, next morning, I got up the morning of the actual convention, and it was cool to have breakfast with Bunny Galore, or also known as Martin. I had breakfast both mornings with Martin. He's lovely. He's just a really, really nice guy. He's really good. Like, he's got amazing knowledge of not just horror films, but just films in general. And he's just a really good laugh to be around, and good fun, and really interesting too. So we had lots of cool, deep discussions and laughs over breakfast. I met Sid Haig as well that morning. We were just chatting briefly over breakfast. The night before, there'd been a kind of prom going on in the hotel, loads of teenagers coming in, and I think the pounding music had been heard around, so Sid was saying that like it kept him up a little bit, but he wasn't complaining or anything. And amazingly, he certainly didn't show tiredness if he had tiredness, because he was just like going for it all day with his line, with people coming up to talk to him and get photographs and autographs. In fact, where I was sat, I was given a table where I was signing copies of my book, and I could see Sid Haig's line, and it just never seemed to stop. It was constant. It was, it was really amazing. Even on the first night, we extended the time from, I think it was supposed to finish at 5 or 5:30 perhaps, but it went on till 6, and the queue was still going for him, and people were coming in. I think security guards were coming in and standing and putting a kind of cork, a human cork, you know, in the end of his queue, so that people would get the hint that, you know, we've got to close this place, and that guy just kept on going. So that was really, really amazing. Anyway, so the first day of the convention was really fun, and I had a good time. I shared a table, by the way, both days with a guy called Killian Gore. I've got his books here somewhere. He's great, right? He's a really cool guy, and he writes like some stuff which I would never have thought of, and yet you see them and you think, of course, this makes sense. He writes loads of horror quiz books, and I mean like specific horror quiz books. He'll write a book about, like hundreds of quiz questions just on The Shining, or just on Phantasm, or just on The Evil Dead, and he's got loads of these things on The Burbs as well. So that, you know, there'd be if you got a bunch of horror guys around and you want to have a good laugh and have a few beers and do like a quiz, a proper quiz that maybe you might get the answers right for. You should check him out. He's good. You can get them in like paperback or ebook. But I grabbed a couple of books from him. This one, Incredible Horror Movie Facts. I always like these little reference books, so little information about, you know, films like Parents and Grindhouse and, you know, Zombie Flesh Eaters, and just little bits of trivia. I always liked that sort of stuff. And he also has this interesting book called What's Your Favorite Scary Movie? And this is where he's talked to 100 filmmakers, horror filmmakers and fans, and asked them the same 13 questions. These are people who made Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And he asks them just questions like, what's your favorite scary movie? What's your favorite horror franchise? What's your favorite zombie movie? What's your favorite monster? You know, what's your favorite subgenre? And just I like this sort of stuff, getting into the heads of what scares the scarers. So he was a lovely guy, and he was there both days, and we hung out quite a lot. I also led a panel for something called the Monster Charity Project, which is a collection of artists from around the country and also a few overseas, or at least one overseas, where it's really cool. They've been given this like bust. Each have been given a generic bust of Frankenstein's head, and what they've had to do is basically just come up and riff on this idea and customize it into these really cool heads, and then they're going to be going up for auction in October. But what was going on at Horicon was they were unveiling these heads to the general public, and people were able to come in and have a look at them, and hopefully in time people will buy them and bid on them and raise a bunch of money for a great charity called Make-A-Wish UK. They've done this before. Last year they did it with Star Wars heads, and I think they raised £28,000. I mean, that's a lot of money helping kids out. And this year they're using horror to help people out. So that was great, and they're trying to make even more. So check out the Monster Charity Project, because the heads are phenomenal. Some of them were, there was a great one I saw, which was it was inspired by The Thing. So it's Frankenstein's head, and then coming off it in like sort of the Robotine makeup, there's a head like twisting off it, and it's surrounded in ice. And all of these heads have been, endorsed by a celebrity. And, I was talking to the artist, and he said, oh yeah, this one's been endorsed by John Carpenter himself. And there was a bunch of other cool ones there. I remember one called Monkey on My Shoulder, where there's a sort of almost like a happy-go-lucky looking Frankenstein, and he's got a monkey on his shoulder. There was a really good one by a guy called Peter. He's an artist who he works on all big movies. He's working on, I can't remember his second name, but he's working at the moment on Blade Runner, and we're chatting about the new Blade Runner film. He assured us that the cars in the new Blade Runner are actual real physical cars with just a few CGI and embellishments, but it's not some big sort of George Lucas CGI fueled world, so that's reassuring. But anyway, he'd done a really great Frankenstein's head inspired by the late Bernie Wrightson, the comic book artist who made The Cycle of the Werewolf, the comics, the strips for that, which I always loved. And anyway, that's just a few of them. There were loads of really, really impressive ones, and they're going up for auction. So you'll have to check them out. And if you've got some money, go for it. I mean, I think the minimum bid, there'll be minimum bids on these things, but I think some of them might be like £100, £150. I think one of them said. So that'd be interesting. So anyway, I was hosting this Q&A with them, and they were really a cool bunch of people and doing a good cause. After that, I went straight up to host the Demonology talk with Jason Love, Scotland's demonologist. And he's a really fascinating guy. I've interviewed him before, and I've read his books too, a couple of his books. So he's a really fascinating bloke, and he is on the sort of the main front line, as it were, of spiritual warfare, if you want to call it that. He's out there casting out demons hither and thither. Now, you may believe in that stuff, or you may think it's like all a pile of rubbish, but whatever you think, I still think he's a pretty fascinating character, and I found that stuff really really fun and interesting. And certainly it seems to be interesting to many people, because quite a lot of people wanted to come to both of his seminars. One lady I spoke to said it was the scariest moment of Horicon for her, sitting and talking about demons on the prowl. And crazily, perhaps, this guy Jason is a big fan of horror, and he, on his stall, as well as having a bunch of like exorcism books and things like that, he also had a bunch of VHS, old pre-certain VHS horror cassettes there for sale, and I was like, how great is this? Anyway, straight after that, I did one of the main things I was doing there, which was the Q&A with the actor John Jarratt. This is a guy who most people will know from being the sadistic pig shooter guy, the psychopath who with a heart of gold. Well, maybe not, but he's a psychopath who is actually quite fun as well. Mick Taylor from the Wolf Creek films and the Wolf Creek series, and he was great. He was just such a fun person, and he's got this kind of habit of like just ripping it out of people, but you can see the twinkle in his eye. You just don't. He could say the most offensive stuff to you, and he does. I mean, I saw some of the things he was writing on people's autographs, and it was like probably the most offensive thing you could think of, that you would think, how could anyone write that? But he does it, and it's just hilarious, and people were loving it. So he was loving it, them ripping into them like that, because at the same time you can tell he's a really nice guy, and he's a really talented actor as well. So he's not just being a jerk. It's it's just somehow works and somehow fun. So he was really great, and it was enjoyable to host the interview with him. And he was a popular guest. I mean, loads of people came to listen to him chat. We talked about his new film Boar, about the killer pig, which looks really cool. I'm looking forward to seeing that. We talked about Quentin Tarantino, who he's worked with before, and Quentin Tarantino says John Jarratt's his favourite Australian actor, and he wanted to meet him before Wolf Creek even started. So he's got a great backlog of films. And obviously we talked a lot about Wolf Creek. If you want to check out that talk, I'll be putting that up in the next episode of this. But no, anyway, that was great. And amazingly, he took a copy of my book and wanted me to sign it. So I gave him a signed copy of Purged, and he said he's going to be reading it on the plane home. Now, that's great. And fair enough, if he maybe you get bored and throw it out the plane window, but maybe you'll like it. You never know. But that was cool that he took it. He was a really nice guy, actually. I barely ate all day, to be honest, when I was there. I had a bar of white chocolate from Janine Makes Cakes, the Sinister Selection, who've always been there. She makes some amazing cakes, and she was cool, and she was still there. And she did a bunch of chocolate things, including an amazing Hellraiser box. They've got a 3D printer now, so they're able to print out all sorts of crazy molds for these chocolates. Even they had like white chocolate human centipede designs, and I was like, nah, I'm not going to eat that. It puts me off. But I did buy one which had Psycho written on it from the film titles, and yeah, because I was so busy and sitting on my stall signing and doing all these other things, I didn't get a chance to stand in the queues for proper food. So I pretty much all day just had that bar of chocolate and a bag of hula hoops. Anyway, it was still nice. That evening, and that evening I had a great, really lovely dinner that night with Sir Christopher Frayling, who was one of the guests, and also Linda Hayden, also Martin Bunny Galore, and also Linda Hayden's sort of chaperone was there too, and we had a really lovely dinner. It was cool sitting right next to Linda Hayden and chatting to her all night, because I had like a childhood crush on her for the first time I saw her in films like Blood on Satan's Claw, and so it was pretty wild sitting next to her all night and just chatting. But she was lovely. She was really funny, and really interesting, and an interesting career, and she was just a lot of fun to hang out with. And so Christopher Frayling is just fascinating. I know him from reading some of his work and seeing him in documentaries, and particularly I was always struck by his work that he did for the film The Innocents, which is just one of my favorite films, one of my favorite haunted house films, which is an excellent scary movie, thought-provoking movie, and he did a lot of work on that. It's his favorite film, I think. But he was lovely, and he's written a new book about vampires, which is an update of a influential book he wrote in the 70s. And he's just like dropping in little things about how he slept over in Vlad the Impaler's castle once when he was in Transylvania during the 70s, when it was like under communist rule with Ceausescu in charge and stuff, and he's just like wandering around like checking out all the vampire stuff and writing about it as a young man. He's chatting about someone mentions Alfred Hitchcock, and he'll just say, oh yeah, I met Alfred Hitchcock one day, and talking about these things not in a hey get me, but in he's just led this interesting life, and it was really cool to hear about it. And also at one point I had no idea, he just mentioned about how he was involved with the design on the back coins. He was the chair of the Royal Mint Design Society for 10 years, and he's been responsible for some really interesting designs on coins. I had absolutely no idea. And he even brought out a bunch of coins, and when you put them together, the whole family of coins with certain backgrounds, it will form the crest of the UK, I think it was. And I had no idea about this, but it was just fun to find out these things about him. He was doing a talk during the day about vampires based on his new hardback book. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to be at that because I was hosting something else at the same time, but from what I've heard, it was really, really interesting thing. The second day was great too. we did all the same sort of stuff again. I led the Q&A with John again, which was fun, and also did the Demonologist stuff and the rest of it. I saw some great cosplay, by the way, during that. I mean, I'm not really a cosplayer. I'm not really artistic enough to do that. I wouldn't really know where to start. I've gone to fancy dress parties before, but I haven't really put any effort into doing that sort of thing. But these guys put amazing effort in. It's really, really quite stunning. They were just walking around, and I saw some amazing makeup work. And I remember I was chatting to some of the professionals, in the charity project thing, and I was chatting to them about it, and they were saying about how not only does it take a lot of time to do this, but some of the materials these guys have to use are really quite expensive, and so they're putting a lot of effort of time and money into these looks, and it really pays off. You can see when they're wandering around and people are like wanting to get photographs of them. There was a guy as well who wasn't like in makeup, but he just was dressed as Negan from The Walking Dead, and I was like, double take. I was like, crikey, he looked so like him. Jeffrey Dean Stanton, and it was like loads of people were getting photos with him. But some of the more sort of full-on cosplay stuff were pretty impressive. I saw this little girl, and she had like a can of Coke like jammed in her eye, and I was chatting to her mum about it, who did the makeup, and her mum had said they'd made sure that it was safe on her eye, and they made sure as well she could look through the hole in the can so she could look around. There was all sorts of great ones. The Babadook looked great. The woman from the old woman from The Shining. Although the lady who played that wasn't necessarily old, but she played an old woman from The Shining. Not The Shining, sorry, The Conjuring. She was there. Got a photo with her. But one of my favourite cosplay people, and there was loads. Guy from Silent Hill with a big head. That was amazing. There was loads. I can't even count them all. There were so many. But one that stood out to me was the guy who played the guy from Father's Day from Creepshow, because I absolutely adore that film. And where's my cake, Bedelia? This zombie walking around with with Bedelia head on a like a silver platter with candles coming out, and the attention to detail was so great. And I was like, this is awesome. That I love that. But there was loads of different things there. During that day as well, Tony Earnshaw came to be on our table as well, and so we were chatting to him. He's a really great guy. He does some excellent books all about not just about horror. He writes about Yorkshire culture. He writes about all sorts of things. He's a journalist as well. But I know in particular from his horror film writing, written a book about the film Night of the Demon, which is one of my favourite films, but unfortunately that book is like gold dust now, really hard to find. And he also wrote a great book about Salem's Lot, one of my favourite TV miniseries. He's a big fan of Salem's Lot, as am I, and I got that book for my birthday once and just devoured it very quickly. I loved it. So he's a really cool guy, and it was good to hang out with him. Matt Shaw was there, who writes extreme horror novels. He was just a few bits down from me, and you could see, I mean, there was loads of people going to his table. People clearly have a taste for extreme horror, and there were some guys next to us as well who were making these really lavish and beautiful looking like making of books, like The Making of American Werewolf in London and Return of the Living Dead, and they also do documentaries about Fright Night and Hellraiser, and their stuff is really high quality, and they're worth checking out. What else did I do? Oh yeah, I met a guy called Daryl Buxton there, who introduced Sid Haig and did some talks with him, and he was a lovely guy. And also I chatted for a little bit briefly to the people from Project Paranormal. So anyway, there was loads of stuff going on. There's too much really to go into. I've already waffled on already, but I haven't even mentioned all the merchandise stuff. I mean, if you ever want to go to a place like Horicon, if you want to get merchandise from t-shirts to this guy had some amazing like sort of witches' heads inside glass jars and all this other stuff. It was really impressive. It was cool. I'm a big fan of like horror soundtracks, and I was looking out for a lot of them. There wasn't a lot of that, but there were some, and there were some on vinyl and cassette, which is kind of really exciting, so it was good to leaf through that stuff. I think it was about 5 p.m. when we finished on that day, and we headed home. But really, summing up, I'd say it was a great weekend with some really brilliant organisers, and you get the impression I do it, and I think most other people do, is that this isn't really. I don't know a lot about conventions. I don't really go to them, or I'm sort of unexperienced in them. But you just get this impression that these guys are not just out to make money or to fleece people out. It feels a bit more grassroots to that. I mean, the celebrities charge for autographs and stuff, but I think that's kind of up to them. That's not to do with the organisers. But anyway, I don't know about that side. But just the general organising of the event was really stellar, and they did some really good work, because getting people in the right places and stuff, it must be hard, and there must be things I'm sure would go wrong here and there, which you'd expect. But they just did it. It's a lot of like people to corral, like thousands of people coming in, and lots of issues that you have to deal with on the spot. There was a Skoda car that was blocking someone in like for hours or something. It's just little things like that. But anyway, they facilitated it very well, and I think the atmosphere was great. And most people I met, in fact, all people I met, were saying, this is a great convention, and compared to others, I mean, I don't know what others are like, but they were saying this is a good one. This is doing really well. So it was good. And sitting at this table where I was at, signing copies of Purged, was what I just found really interesting. Was I was like looking out, and I was seeing people walking up to the celebrities, these horror people, and meeting them, and you can and then seeing them come back, because I was on the side there, and then looking at, and then all of the lines were like this. That's very close to Sid Haig's line, but I could see all the lines really. Heather Langenkamp's particularly, and John Jarratt's, and you can just see like the look in people's faces when they're lining up to get an autograph or to get a selfie, and they're bringing all sorts of things that matter to them. They're almost like sort of ritual objects. Like some guy brought a little replica house of Nightmare on Elm Street. Other people are bringing. One woman, was it a woman or a man? I think I just saw a picture of this actually, so I just saw hands holding it. That's why I don't know if it was man or a woman, but it was a part of a pinball machine, and they brought a part of their Elvira pinball machine for Cassandra Peterson to sign. And anyway, there's all these people just bringing these precious little objects in to be signed by these people, and you can see the look of like nervousness on their faces, or like anticipation, and then they meet their celebrity or whatever, and you see them walking off, and like the look of satisfaction or excitement, and they're holding onto their things, and it's just kind of cool to be reminded that you're not a freak. Like there's other people out there who find this sort of thing like cool and meaningful and interesting. With my sociology hat on, to just wrap things up, I'd say what I find really interesting is, like, you never know, the growth of conventions and these sorts of gatherings. You could probably, I think, I wouldn't be surprised if you could link them with the decline of institutions like, for example, organized religion and things like that, where in some ways there's a lack of community feel. I mean, I go to church, as you know, and so I have a strong like sense of community anyway in sort of the Christian community, in churches and stuff like that. But not everyone has that, or not everyone wants it in that way, in a kind of religious way. But we still are people who require community. We still are people who need that and find it helpful. And I think these conventions do that. They're not just about coming and meeting the Wolf Creek guy, or just meeting the woman off Nightmare on Elm Street. I mean, they're important parts of it, but there's also this kind of camaraderie, this connection that people have with one another. It's a kind of like a family, which I think is actually quite important in our fragmented world. So many people are kind of, we talk on Facebook and things like that, but more and more we are drawn, divided and pushed apart. And it's just fascinating how, I mean, me going to church, there's a combination of people will come together because of like belief in God, or seeking God at least, or checking him out. And that means that's a common interest. And the thing that brings them all is that, but it means there can be any age, any race, any gender. And it's the same with this, the common interest is in horror movies. And so it's not about a particular demographic, and you get loads of different people from all sorts of walks of life, old, young, gay, straight. It's just all these different people, any color, any religion. And that's just something that's a cool thing to see in society, people connecting together. So it kind of reminded me ever so slightly of church community, although I don't know of any church that offers, actual live tattooing on site, but you never know. Maybe there's some church somewhere that does that. Anyway, I had a great time. I've talked for half an hour about it. I can't believe it, so I'll shut up now. I recommend you try it out next year and try listen to the John Jarratt interview that I'm going to be putting up next, where I'm fielding questions and answers to him from the audience, because he's funny and he's really interesting too. But in the meantime, you can always check out my YouTube channel for more reviews, and you can subscribe. A whole bunch of stuff on there, or the podcast, and hey, if you want to, check out my book Purged, because that's out there now in all formats, including audiobook. Oh yeah. Oh, and there's a free soundtrack to it if you like soundtrack music. I wrote a full score, orchestral score for it, that's currently streaming for free at Bandcamp. Check all this out at www.peterlaws.co.uk. Follow me on Twitter at Rev Peter Laws, or check out the Facebook page, The Flicks the Church Forgot. I'd also add, if a few people from Horicon have kind of made friends with me, or asking for friend requests through Facebook, which I've accepted, but I don't do loads of horror stuff just through my Facebook page. So my Facebook profile, that's just kind of me. If you're more interested in the horror stuff, I suggest you like The Flicks the Church Forgot, because that's more horror related, or join me on Twitter. Anyway, that's enough of me. If you went to Horicon, it was great to meet you. If you didn't, maybe I'll meet you at the next one. But until then, don't forget The Flicks the Church Forgot. Bye-bye.
I'm afraid. I'm going to make that one.